Hello and welcome to the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where there is never a dull day on the sports media beat. And that's why we got two of the best in the business here with us today. We're going with a three-ball because we have some big stories to cover. Headlining those topics, Molly Qerim exiting ESPN, exiting First Take quite abruptly, one might say. Last night, Austin Karp of Sports Business Journal reported that Molly Qerim was exiting at the end of the year, but it turns out she is exiting effective immediately. I'm going to play a quick clip of how Stephen A. Smith responded to that on this morning's edition of First Take.
Good morning and welcome to First Take. Normally, our friend Molly Qerim would greet you. However, Molly announced last night she will be departing from ESPN. She's hosted First Take for 10 years and elevated the show with her grace, her expertise, her incomparable kindness. She's been an enormous part of our success for a decade. Not only did she keep me and many others in line, she did it with dignity and class and kindness, to say the least. We'll miss her and wish her every blessing on her future. I personally am grateful to her for her friendship, and I will miss spending every weekday morning with her right by my side.
Ben, I'm going to start with you. That was clearly a surprise to Stephen A., a surprise to everyone that watches First Take in the mornings, everyone that pays attention to the industry. I mean, Molly was on the show just yesterday, so things fell out pretty quickly. What was your reaction this morning when you saw Stephen A. get on ESPN and pretty much confirm that this Molly Qerim would no longer be with the show or at the network?
I think the obvious take is that whatever happened is it wasn't amicable. This is not them parting on good terms. I think you look at the way it was reported by Austin Karp at Sports Business Journal on Monday night, and it comes out that, she's going to be done at the end of the year, which is pretty early, I would say, in these type of negotiations to make that sort of judgment when you're still 3 months out. But sometimes that happens. Sometimes both sides realize they're at the end, and they've reached kind of a stalemate, and they both decide to go their separate ways. But then you turn on First Take today, and Stephen A. Smith is opening it up, and he's bidding farewell to Molly. And it's clear that she's done for good. Like, this is it for her. I think it just speaks to the idea that whatever happened was not amicable, and that they are not parting on seemingly very pleasant terms at this moment.
Yeah, I think that was clear to me too. It's like Stephen A. put on his apology voice, whenever he gets into a scandal that he has to monologue an apology for. That was the same type of voice he was using at the top of today's show. So, Brendan, if it was abrupt, Stephen A., we'll get into, he went on his radio show later today and talked a bit about contract negotiations and how these things work. But what do you think is at the heart of this, just based off of how Stephen A. is talking about it? And then, of course, Molly Qerim's statement on social media earlier.
Yeah, I think the thing to also point to in terms of the strange nature of the timing of everything is her post on her Instagram story started off with, the news came out earlier than I intended, right? So like nobody was planning for any of this to get out today, let alone I think for her to basically have already worked her last day on set for that show that she's, as close to a face of as anybody besides Stephen A. Smith. So it's a lot of dot connecting. I mean, I don't know what caused it. Obviously, you would say money always is the number one answer to that question. But I mean, kind of between the lines of that, to me, it's just, this has always been true of ESPN and media and whatever, but nobody is irreplaceable, right? Like, and I think maybe it's just a shocking example of that because of the value that ESPN has placed on First Take and the niche that show clearly has in the sports ecosystem, and the money that Stephen A. just got paid to host that show for the next 5 years plus. And he is so good about making a point of highlighting her as a fundamental part of it. And so you would just think, well, if First Take's not going anywhere, if they value Stephen A. Smith to this tune of, an 8-figure and then some type of salary, and she's a fixture on it, boom, 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 she's going to get paid and that'll just get done. But the list of people where that's the case at ESPN, it's probably one hand. And Stephen A. might be the only one of those who's not on a game broadcast. So it's just the unfortunate reality, I think.
Yeah, it's super interesting because, Jimmy Pitaro was on stage earlier today at Front Office Sports' conference, touting the ratings success of its programming, of First Take's programming and the rest of ESPN's daily lineup, talking about how it's been growing year over year, even though, obviously we all know the cable bundle is declining. Molly has been with First Take for the last 10 years. I think most would argue that is, the time period with which the show has grown into itself the most and become what it is today. To me, like, my read on this is probably pretty similar to you guys. Stephen A. clearly valued her a lot. He's said as much. He said it multiple times on the show. He said it on his radio show that Molly Qerim was a critical part in how First Take has grown and developed over the years, and in his personal success as well. To me, it seems like, she, wanted to maximize, her leverage here and say that, I'm a crucial part of this show. I need to be compensated as such. And perhaps ESPN didn't agree with that. We don't really know. Ben, you've obviously listened to the radio show and Stephen A. Smith's monologue about, contract negotiations and leverage. Did you have any takeaways from that? Did you read any tea leaves about, possibly what could have happened behind the scenes that this was such an abrupt exit?
Yeah. First of all, I'd add this. Molly is very good on that show. Like, that's, yeah. I watch First Take close to every day. And I didn't watch like a ton of First Take before I started at Awful Announcing 2 years ago. And I think, we all have our perceptions about what First Take is if you're not watching it regularly. And I thought it was kind of a cartoonish debate show, probably more in line with the Stephen A. and Skip Bayless version of it. Molly brings like a level of humanity. Molly calls out Stephen A. on his bullshit. She adds a lot of humor. Like, she makes that more of like a traditional morning show than I think a lot of people realize that it traditionally is. And
she's knowledgeable. Like, I think that's the thing. When that show gets into Fantasyland, outlandish, loud mode, I think she is often able to ground it and play that kind of intermediary between the two yelling people at the desk in a way that actually, like, yeah, it goes unheralded for sure.
Yeah. And so, like, I think if you were to look at First Take's success, like, she is one of the key reasons why that show has gotten so much better, but I'm also not sure she's one of the key reasons why the ratings are what they are. I think you could point to, obviously, the time slot. You could point to Stephen A. You could point to any number of things. I'm not sure how critical she is to the ratings. And so that's probably where that disconnect, I would imagine, between her and ESPN management exists. In terms of Stephen A.'s comments on his radio show, the Stephen A. Smith show, which he made right after First Take today, like, I think, one, he focused on the negotiations. And so I think the key to all this is the negotiations. And I think I don't think like you really need to dig deeper than these are. I mean, maybe something else will come out, but my read on it right now is these are negotiations that just fell apart. It seems like ESPN's offer was not what she was looking for, and she was probably insulted by that. But then Stephen A. went on this, he commented on Molly leaving, said he was sad about it, said he was blindsided by it, said, everybody has to handle their business, et cetera, et cetera. But then he went on this lengthy rant about leverage, and he clarified at least 4 or 5 times that he wasn't talking about Molly, yet kept circling back to Molly. And the gist of it was basically, we all, like, everybody in this industry might think they can do this, might think they can do that. The reality is you don't have the right to do whatever you want. Everybody answers to somebody. And he he almost seemed to be talking about other people who have fallen irrelevant in this industry. And I was trying to piece together who that could even be. And I couldn't come up with a clear conclusion, but it almost seemed to be like a warning he was sending to Molly more than anything. But that's definitely, if you just take everything Stephen A said on his radio show as a whole, I definitely think it speaks to the idea that this was predominantly about whatever was going on with her negotiations.
Here's the crazy thing to me is that, when you think of people in this industry that are kingmakers, like Stephen A. Smith is probably, in the top 5 of that list, right? Like he has the ability to make or break careers. And so to me, it doesn't make much sense if he values Molly Qerim's work so much and thinks she's such a critical part of the success of First Take. Why is he not standing up for her in these negotiations? If anyone is able to, kind of put their foot down with ESPN management and maybe, get a few concessions out of them for a talent that they like, it would probably be Stephen A. So to me, that's another question, Brendan. Like there's so much uncertainty about why this fell through as quickly as it did. It seems like within the last 24 hours. I mean, she was on the show yesterday. Last night, it was reported that she was leaving at the end of the year. And then, of course, we know now she will no longer be on the show. That is not a typical exit when it comes to a TV personality, especially one that is, presumably beloved like Molly Qerim is.
Compared to Tony Reali's year-long good farewell tour, it's a lot different. I don't know. Yeah, I think that's why why it's generating so much intrigue, why we have more live viewers than we've had for this yet. I mean, I think that's why it's interesting. So the thing about it though is, from her standpoint, it's unlikely whatever went on, whether it's entirely financial or any sort of politics behind the scenes, it's going to be tough to find even a collection of jobs to probably get the stature and the salary that she was getting here, as much as we sometimes try to avoid the pocket watching and everything. Like, this is a huge show. It's probably the biggest sports studio show we have that's not game related. It's going to be tough for her to piece that together. She was a really experienced reporter and host prior to this. I don't doubt she'll land somewhere pretty substantive, but there's a reason she was here for 10 years, I would imagine, and probably why she's a little upset to be going. My question is, who hosts the show next? That's the part of this that I'm pretty interested by, because it needs a moderator, it needs an anchor, and as we started off this whole thing by saying, you can overlook how difficult of a job that is at your own peril if you're ESPN.
Yeah, I agree, and we'll get to that in a minute. I just want to kind of land the plane on this one point here. Am I wrong to read between the lines that like this wouldn't happen unless Stephen A. Smith blessed this to happen? Because like I said,
or something in the negotiations crossed a line where he could no longer be the guardian angel that he's been for other people. Like Shannon Sharp. Like, obviously nothing is in the realm of what happened with Shannon Sharp, but that's an extreme example where whatever the hell Stephen A. Smith was going to say no longer mattered. So that's at least an example that he's not a kingmaker no matter what the circumstance is. And so maybe something just broke down where his word didn't matter as much anymore.
She also might have been asking for a lot of money. Like, she might have been asking for an unreasonable amount of money, even in Stephen A. Smith's eyes. And like I said earlier, like, it's easy to see where that disconnect would exist, because she is a crucial part of the show. But the show is already a show that has an $100 million talent invested in it, in Stephen A. Smith, and that it's Stephen A. Smith's vehicle. So she is not the most critical ingredient in that show. That's kind of just my read on it. Is it just seems like whatever the number was, these two sides like weren't even in the same ballpark on it.
Or maybe she wanted a job that was beyond First Take, and then it's not really Stephen A. Smith's purview anymore. There's only so many opportunities to try to play that card, and when your contract's coming up, that's the time to do it. Hey, I want to host this, I want to try this out, and I'm going to get paid in conjunction with that a little bit more than as if I was just the First Take. I mean, there's a lot of ways you could map this out of how it could have gone and why it might have flown away from anything Stephen A. Smith could have helped her out on.
Yeah. Well, let's get to the replacement. We know that Stephen A. is going to host himself the remainder of the week. We know a few of the fill-in hosts that have, filled in for Molly in the past. Ben, I know you wrote a column for the website that's going out in a few minutes, actually, about who could possibly replace Molly Qerim in the First Take chair. Why don't you go over, some of the possibilities?
Yeah, I mean, so to me, it just depends on what direction they want to take the show. And so if you want, to replace Molly 1-to-1, I think you look at the people who have replaced her in the past when she's been on vacation or PTO or whatever. Shea Pepler-Cornett is traditionally like the top fill-in, it seems like, on First Take. And so like she, I think, would be probably the most obvious candidate if they're looking for somebody in that vein. I think Christine Williamson also fills in on a pretty frequent basis, and it's easy to see how her personality and energy would match that show. I think she's probably maybe a little more similar to Molly than Shea is. Courtney Cronin has filled in. She's not a traditional host. She's more of a reporter, but she's definitely getting more opportunities at ESPN in hosting roles. She would bring a different perspective. And then you could get creative. I mean, the one name, I don't think this is who they would go with. I don't think this is what they hired him for. But I could see a scenario where if this Peter Schrager afternoon show doesn't come to fruition, where First Take becomes a Stephen A. Smith, Peter Schrager type of vehicle. Peter has the versatility to both host and debate. That might give you some flexibility. I don't think that's what it would be, but he's at least the name that stood out to me. He's hosted it since coming on board. And then the other one would just be Stephen A. Smith. And Stephen A. Smith has cultivated this almost like a faction in pro wrestling, like a group of people who he has kind of taken up for at ESPN, like you referenced. And if this just kind of became the Stephen A. Smith show in terms of, all right, I'm hosting it. Here's Cam Newton. Here's Ryan Clark. Here's Peter Schrager. Like, here are my friends. I could see that as well. But ultimately, I would think they just go the traditional route. But I do think this is an opportunity for them to kind of reshape the show if that's what they're looking to do.
Who's your leader in the clubhouse, Brendan?
I feel like I like the Christine Williamson idea. I think that she's been a clear up-and-comer at ESPN. She hosts a variety of sports centers. She's gone on the road. She does digital stuff for them. I like the breadth of sports knowledge that she would bring. Courtney Cronin's the one who came to mind when I first saw the news come down on Monday night, but because I like the idea of a hardcore reporter kind of injecting themselves into that show and balancing it even more than Molly might have been able to at times, but it would be very NFL specific. And I don't know if again, it's a tough job, as we've said 100 times already. And so I don't know that's a big leap to make from NFL Nation to hosting a debate show like that. Whereas Christine, I think, brings a more relevant experience. I also like out of the box. I mean, we like the Gilbert Arenas, Skip Bayless NFL debate thing that they started recently. They brought an influencer in, somebody that I literally never heard of, who goes by one name, and I had to look her up on Instagram to even know who this person was. I don't think they're going to go that inexperienced, but all bets are off, because I think the bottom line is it's going to be who Stephen A. Smith wants it to be.
Stephen A. Smith's daughter.
Yeah, great. Honestly, if you were if Kalshi has some odds on that or something, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some action there.
Be good value.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. All right. Last topic on Molly Qerim, and then we're gonna move on to Tom Brady and his whole kerfuffle last night. But I want to know what you guys think is next for Molly. You know, when I saw this report from SBJ last night, I thought it was pretty clear that she had her next step lined up. I think now, like, that's probably not the case. So where does someone with Molly's skill set go from here? You know, I don't think too many people are going to remember her career at ESPN pre-First Take. This is kind of the role that has defined her career. What do you do now if you're Molly?
Yeah, I think she was at NFL Network before she was at ESPN, and you would imagine going back to NFL Network is now off the table. I I don't know. I wish I had a good answer for you. I don't have a great answer because there's kind of a dearth of options. There's not a lot of shows like First Take. There's not a lot of sports networks. I mean, I don't think she's going to go to Barstool or FS1. I mean, maybe there's an opportunity depending on what FS1 does with its programming, but there's just not a lot of like obvious like sports hosting roles. So yeah, like you could see her like in a studio somewhere, but she's definitely overqualified to be hosting a just, you know, a pregame show. I feel like, so I don't know.
Big Ten network pregame. Yeah, that would be a
You don't think she could host Wake Up Barstool?
I mean, that Dave's trying a lot of things right now. So yeah, maybe.
It's tough because if you're her, you're leaving the place that owns most of the football content there is, especially as the NFL Network deal comes closer to completion. So, you know, SEC Network, NFL Network, College Football National, NFL National, a lot of those roles are at ESPN. And so, you know, you kind of just go from there and you can try to, you know, like the obvious, what are the recently added or potentially ready for a change-up types of big game shoulder programming types of studio shows. But I mean, that feels like a step back from First Take. So if she did have a little bit lined up, or at least kind of a bailout plan as she negotiated, then it's hard to imagine it was one of those things. So I'm kind of ready for anything on this.
Right. To me, her skill set feels more in line with, you know, something digital, something in the podcast space, more so than hosting another studio show. I think First Take is a pretty unique job when it comes to sports television. There's not really too many other shows quite like it. I mean, there's plenty of debate shows, but there's really only one debate show where you have to moderate Stephen A. Smith, right? So I kind of feel like a podcast or something else in the digital space would kind of suit her skill set a bit more. She'd be able to show a little bit more of her personality in that way. And maybe that's what she wants. Maybe she feels like she can kind of spread her wings in that type of environment. Okay, guys, let's move on to the other big story of the day, which is Tom Brady's role as minority owner of the Las Vegas Raiders. As well as his role as, you know, Fox Sports' lead NFL broadcaster. This story, you know, it's obviously been simmering under the surface for over a year now, but it kind of blew up yesterday when Peter Schrager, in his debut as an NFL sideline reporter, had a report about Tom Brady wearing the headset in the Las Vegas Raiders coaching booth, having multiple meetings a week with Chip Kelly, really being much more involved, at least, you know, outwardly involved in the Raiders operations than we once thought. So, Brendan, I'll go to you first. Do we think this kind of new development is going to, you know, manifest itself in any sort of changes in Brady's access to other teams, access to production meetings, which he recently just got? Is this going to change anything?
I don't think it'll change anything, to answer your question. I feel like I have two other questions that I've been chewing on. I don't remember which of you guys I was on with last week where I joked about the word cloud of our show, and I said that Pablo Torre's name was probably outsized on that. Tom Brady's name takes up 80% of it. Like, we have chewed on every single angle of this thing, but so the first one, which is smaller, Ben, is, do you think that this has been happening in more games and they just happened to point a camera at him because he was announcing this Saudi Arabian flag football game and it was kind of known that he was there and publicized, and so some ESPN producer or camera operator thought to look? Or do you think this really was the first time that Brady might have tried something like this?
I don't think he gets the opportunity to do it because he's usually somewhere else on Sundays. And so the fact that it was a primetime game did put him in a position to do that.
That's true. And it is the Raiders. So I guess if we look back last year, did they even have another primetime game? I'm not sure.
Yeah, not that I can recall. So it's not happening obviously on a weekly basis because logistically it can't, but it did feel I don't know. Something about the entire moment almost felt manufactured. And not necessarily on Brady's end, but more so on ESPN's end, where you have this beautiful shot of Tom Brady sitting in the coach's booth wearing a headset as you go to Peter Schrager with a hit, just detailing in depth, like the first on record hard reporting we have about just how involved Tom Brady actually is with the Raiders operation. That to me is what stood out. But yeah, I don't think this is obviously not happening on a weekly basis, but it's hard to see that clip and listen to Peter's reporting and have any kind of takeaway other than that he is heavily involved with the Raiders weekly game plan operations.
Right. Like, I feel like this is a story that we have covered many times in the last year. And this doesn't really change much in terms of like what our perception of, Tom Brady's role with the Raiders is. But I think for the general public, this could have been a tipping point, right? Like actually seeing him with a headset at the game, even if, he doesn't have a lot of opportunities to do that, it shows that, whatever information he's gleaning from these other teams, whether it be in production meetings or just by way of being a broadcaster, right? You're going to hear things. People are going to tell you things that you might not necessarily get if you're just Joe Schmo minority owner of any other NFL team. And I think that matters to people, especially when, the Raiders are actually, potentially a competitive team this year, more so than they were last year. And I think the NFL is going to get some heat over this. And it's interesting because of, how they changed the policies this year to allow him to virtually attend these meetings. I'm wondering if there's a possibility here where we get a backtrack and, maybe Brady is no longer allowed to attend those meetings, or at least there's something symbolic done by the NFL to at least, kind of put people's concerns aside.
I think, I'm not as convinced there's enough public backlash to change anything. I think for a lot of the general I think there's a large portion of the general public who doesn't even, I'm not going to say comprehend, but just doesn't care about the conflict of interest. To them, it's like just,
it's a weirdly complicated kind of thing to understand. I agree with that, especially because his role with the Raiders is still so amorphous, right? Like, maybe I think that, like, to Drew's point, seeing it helps, but I don't know. I think people just don't think owners are involved. I feel like it kind of boils down to that, where people just wouldn't associate an owner with being around enough to play a role if you wanted to.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I actually saw in our comments, it does put kind of Fox in a weird position if you want to talk about like how Brady handles himself on the broadcast. And that was something we talked about a little bit last year when it came to the Lions playoff game where the Raiders were getting ready to interview Ben Johnson. I think though this could lead to change, but the change is going to have to come from the 31 other teams. And if I'm the 31 other teams, I'm looking at this, and even if it's just optically, I'm saying like, this sucks. Like this makes us all look like idiots for talking to this guy. And I wonder if we get to a situation where, especially if they're calling a Chiefs game or calling another AFC West team, or even an AFC team for that matter, like if he just gets shut out of these meetings, if they're just coaches and players who are flatly going to say, I'm not going to talk. What are you talking about? I'm not going to talk to this guy.
He alluded to that when he was on Chris Collinsworth's podcast heading into week 1, and I wrote up his comments because it was really the first time it wasn't a deep addressing of the situation, but he at least like confronted it and had to say something. And he basically was like, I never expected these guys to give me much in these meetings anyway. And he didn't say that's because of the Raiders ownership situation or because he's Tom Brady and is still doing so many other things beyond just being a broadcaster. But if you kind of read between the lines, that might have been what he meant. And so I would imagine that's the first change is the uglier this gets, no one has to talk to Tom Brady. I mean, like, you're required to go do this stuff. It's collectively bargained if you're the quarterback of the team that's playing and he's broadcasting your game. But nobody's forcing you to bring the play sheet in and walk him through it, So I would imagine that's the easy one. I would also say ESPN or Fox is probably completely pissed at ESPN for putting them in this situation. That was not necessary. No one required ESPN to do all that yesterday, and yet they did. I don't know if it was any sort of intentional rivalry thing there, but it certainly didn't help Fox. But yeah, that was the other question I was going to ask, was why the NFL is. They seem to be the one who has who's kind of keeping this going the most. Like, obviously we get why Fox wants it. They're paying him a whole bunch of money. They clearly believe that he moves the needle for them in a variety of ways, and it's valuable to have him on their roster and be on the biggest games. The Raiders want Tom Brady around because they're a shit show. And to your point about Drew, like them being more competitive, Ben's guy Chip Kelly doesn't seem to be working over there. So I'm not sure we really have to worry about the Raiders making a push for the AFC West or anything. But like, the owners apparently expressed skepticism way back when he made his bid to buy the 5% of the team that he was getting a discount. So I don't think the owners have always been on board with this. They probably don't want him, scuttling around their facilities and getting, company secrets. So it feels like I just come back to the NFL. Like the NFL, the Shield, the people in New York City who run this league seem to be the ones who could put a kibosh on it and are not doing that. And I don't really get why, because they don't need another 20 years of Tom Brady around to keep this sport popular or something. Fox is going to be fine. People love Greg Olson. They loved Troy Aikman before that. Like nothing. The NFL doesn't need Tom Brady calling games for Fox in order for this to work out, or him running the Raiders. So that's the part where why can't they just create a rule or lay down a punishment or let the owners vote on whatever? That part is head scratching.
For me, the interesting part of this is if you gave Tom Brady truth serum, would he rather be the top NFL broadcaster at Fox, or would he rather be a minority owner in the Las Vegas Raiders? Because I think that would tell you where his ultimate loyalties lie. Like, if he
has to be the Raiders,
I think it's 100% the Raiders.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well.
He didn't go to Syracuse to call games. He's a fucking quarterback. He wants to run a team.
Right. So if we're operating under that premise, then like this becomes a much bigger issue. And I think we're just kind of at the start of this, to be completely honest. If we get other reports now that, Tom Brady is, in constant contact with the coaching staff and helping with scheme or anything of the sort, this is something that's not going to go away overnight. And, it's up to the NFL, like you said, to actually, act on it. Is it worth the headache from the other 31 owners to keep Brady on the broadcast team at Fox? We'll see. Fox has a pretty clear succession plan there if it ever comes to that in Greg Olson. So Ben, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, do we want to should we throw in the Saudi Arabia conversation now too?
Why not?
We're just taking the podcast to Riyadh next week.
Hey, I'm
helping
all
to
ears.
promote it.
I will say it is pretty funny to see now. I mean, I've been following this Saudi Arabia stuff going back to WWE in 2018, and to see them now not only get into mainstream sports with the NFL, but to use the exact same playbook where when they do these WWE shows, they're bringing back all the legends. Like they literally are just bringing back all the old guys to do these big shows, and to see them repeating the same playbook, but with flag football, and it's Tom Brady and it's Gronk. There's just something funny about the idea that that's the playbook they're emulating for all of this.
It's worked so well with every other sport they've gotten into.
Yeah, it's
made a lot of people rich.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it feels like an episode of Succession or something a lot of the time. It's like, I guess I could chart down a way that this sucks for regular people if I wanted to, but it's a lot of hypotheticals and extrapolations to get there. It mostly just seems like rich people having fun, and I guess Tom Brady can go throw a football around a little bit and no one will watch it, and then they can, pay each other. My final word on it is, and Adam Schefter tweeted out something earlier, which is that the league has confirmed that Brady didn't break rules by being in the coach's booth, which, like, that was the Raiders coach's booth at their home facility. So I don't think anyone really thought that they broke the rules, but I don't know. I would just caution reporting from that guy about this situation is maybe how I would close it, because he's the same fellow who insisted all year last year that Brady barely even knew anybody in the Raiders building and didn't even own a black or a silver T-shirt. You know what I mean? If you were to,
he
listen
thought
to
they
Adam
still
Schefter.
played in Oakland.
Yeah, exactly. He flew to Oakland one time and realized he was in the wrong spot. That's how little he ever had to do with the Raiders. So that's clearly not true. And so that just adds another wrinkle, which is like why so many parties appear to just want this to happen so badly. And then you turn the TV on Sundays and it's milquetoast nothing broadcast, and the Raiders can't win a fucking football game. So it's like, what is the push? Why is this so important to everybody? But apparently it is.
That is a good place to leave this conversation. I'm sure Tom Brady's conflict of interest will be another topic on a future episode of the Play-by-Play. But for now, that is all. Thank you, Ben and Brendan, for joining us. Thank you all for listening. Catch us on Thursday. Have a good one.